Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Sam Jacobs from 6 Degrees Investor Relations. I'll be hosting today's presentation from Island Pharmaceuticals, CEO and Managing Director, Dr. David Foster, and he'll be accompanied today by Island's Non-Executive Chairman, Mr. Jason Carroll. So in today's presentation, David and Jason will provide an overview of the strategic acquisition of the galidesivir antiviral program from BioCryst Pharmaceuticals. That's a NASDAQ-listed healthcare company. And they'll also provide a summary now of Island's near-term development plans for that galidesivir asset post-acquisition. After the presentation, we'll commence a Q&A like usual, so that'll comprise both written submissions and the live questions segment. Obviously, a recording of the webinar will then be available through Island's platforms later on today. But for now, we'll kick off the presentation. So David and Jason, the floor is yours.
Sam, thank you very much. Thanks everyone for coming to this webinar. We are very excited to give you an update on galidesivir and why we think it's a phenomenal program, and we can't wait to get started on it. But before I jump into that, I want to welcome Jason Carroll as chairman to the company. I'm excited for him to be here. And Jason, do you have a few words you might want to say?
Sure. Thanks, David. Thanks everyone for joining. I too am really excited about this opportunity, and it's for me. It's been a few years being protected or watching Island, seeing it grow and seeing it develop. I think this actually is an opportunity for truly transformational growth for the company, and David will take you through that. But just a couple of quick things. When you look at a pharma company's value, as I do a lot, there are a few questions you have to ask. Does it work? Is it safe and effective? Have you protected its value? Can you actually make it? How many trials you have to do? How long will it take? How much will it cost? And then what sort of patient pool will you be bringing in? And then at the end, how do you commercialize it? How do you pay for it? And I think a lot of those questions will be answered today in terms of what actual value galidesivir will bring to Island Pharma. I really am excited actually to hear David as well, because I've only been chair for a couple of weeks, but I'm already well and truly into it and loving it. So thanks, David. Appreciate that.
Yeah, no, welcome, Jason. Again, my pleasure. So with that, I'm going to start going through the presentation. I've said it before, Island Pharmaceuticals is an antiviral drug development company. As you all know, you've heard me say before, we really like to get assets that come to us with clinical history. We like the idea of molecules coming to us. They've been de-risked. They've been through phase 1 safety studies. And as we were looking to bring in another asset, that was one of the hallmarks of a molecule that we found interesting. Something that had good activity as an antiviral, something that had already been in clinical trials, where we might have an expedited path to approval. And as it turns out, galidesivir ticks all of those boxes. It's exactly what we were looking for, and we're incredibly excited to tell you today that we have executed the asset purchase agreement to acquire galidesivir. If you recall, when we have been discussing this program over the course of the last 9 months, if not longer, we had a binding term sheet for an option to acquire galidesivir, which would mean the next agreement we would have signed would be the formal option agreement. As a result of significant diligence, we've been working really hard in the background over the last several months to do a lot of diligence. We actually became very comfortable and excited about this program that we elected not to execute that option, rather go straight to an acquisition. So we will own this outright. We will close the transaction within the next 30 days. And then after that, we're off to the races. So couldn't be more excited to say that we've executed the asset purchase agreement. Again, as with ISL 101, galidesivir comes to us with incredibly positive, robust results in aggressive animal models. Likewise, as with ISL 101, major market potential, huge opportunities from the market side of things. So, and just as a reminder, we love ISL 101. We recently announced incredibly positive results from a phase 2 clinical trial in dengue-infected individuals. So with both of these assets now poised to move forward, we're incredibly excited and consider ourselves very fortunate to be in a position to have 2 excellent assets, both of which are eligible for priority review vouchers today. Most recently, PRVs have sold for about $150 million US. That's about 225 million Aussie. Again, both ISO 101 and galidesivir today are eligible for PRV. So we think we are probably in pretty rare company as a pharmaceutical company with two opportunities at a PRV in the relative near term. Corporate overview, just to give you some highlights. We have about 236 million shares outstanding. We closed on the 7th at 14.5 cents, giving us about a $34 million market cap. I'm always grateful to our shareholders, our substantial shareholders listed here. I'm incredibly grateful for their support, as with all of the investors who have come along for the journey with us. And I've already mentioned Jason Carroll joining us as non-executive chair. Very excited to have Jason here. It's no secret that he's been following the company, involved with the company, and that we talk to Jason a lot. And I just can't really thank you enough for your support. Jason, working with Chris Tumanopoulos and myself, we are a pretty aggressive team, and we're getting things done, and I'm very excited about that. So I've shown you this slide before and the benefits of repurposing. So the traditional drug development path, it's about 10 to 15 years. It costs about $2 billion to get a drug to market from start to finish. And as I've said before, we want no part of that. When talking about ISO 101, I was always very happy to say we are in phase 2 clinical trials. We're seeing efficacy, and we wanted to get there quickly. Galidesivir actually is also nuanced like that. While we may not have to do phase 2 and phase 3 clinical trials for reasons I'll explain in a minute, we have phase 1 data, we have phenomenal animal data, and we believe we're going to have an expedited path to approval. We're very excited about that. So in terms of the acquisition, just so that you all know what's going on, we have acquired the program. This is the galidesivir program from BioCryst. What comes with that is galidesivir, all of the IP associated with that, and other related compounds associated with this program. There's clinical data, there's robust preclinical data, there's a huge international patent portfolio where we have patents issued around the world with expirations of between 2031 and 2037. The terms of the acquisition, I'll fly through these: an upfront fee of $550,000 US that includes the $50,000 option fee. There's a $500,000 fee upon completion of a phase 2 clinical trial, a $1 million fee upon NDA approval or equivalent. So between a phase 2 and approval, that's $1.5 million. However, if we get an approval based on the animal rule, which I'll explain in more detail, that would mean we may not need to run a phase 2 clinical trial, and we would also pay $1.5 million upon approval via the animal rule. The royalties are commercially friendly to us, ranging between 5 and 10% of net sales. And then should we get a PRV, a priority review voucher, BioCryst would get 25% of the proceeds from the PRV associated with this program. A little bit of history about the galidesivir program. We have mentioned it before, but the US government has been very, very interested in the development of galidesivir. They're interested for a number of reasons, but largely this was initially a program that was designed to target high priority threats like Marburg, like Ebola virus. These are viruses that are believed to be weaponized. So this is really a bioterror countermeasure strategy. The US government has put at least around $70 million into the development of galidesivir. But as BioCryst was studying the molecule, they recognized not only is it active against Ebola and against Marburg, but actually there's more than 20 different viruses that it has excellent activity against. It could be a very widely used antiviral molecule eventually. And the first thing we want to do is pursue it in Marburg for reasons I'll explain shortly. So again, I've mentioned we have phase 1 safety data. There have been multiple phase 1 clinical trials demonstrating that it has an excellent safety profile. So we're really ready to move the program forward. Again, the markets that we're going to unlock, it's actually something I think is very exciting. Because there's so many viruses that this has activity against, we think that in and of itself, it could be a huge antiviral molecule against a variety of viral threats. But Because of the activity against the bioterror threats, that creates some unique opportunities. The first one I want to highlight is the potential that this could be used in strategic stockpiles, national stockpiles. And again, this would be in the face of a bioterror attack, we would have a molecule like galidesivir available to be disseminated into the public to protect the public against this. This is a very important priority for the US government and other governments. Just to give you a flavor of what these government stockpile programs look like, there are an anthrax vaccine program, has a contract worth approaching $1 billion. There's a smallpox vaccine program that has been renewed for several years, and it ranges of between $100 and $150 million every year to supply that vaccine to the smallpox vaccine to the government stockpiles. So these can be very lucrative. And again, numerous antiviral programs. There's lots of opportunities for partnering with this. It's a great commercial opportunity. I mentioned that it has activity against 20 plus viruses. I'm not going to go through this entire list. I do want to highlight a few. If you look in the upper left-hand corner, you can see Marburg, various strains of the Marburg virus. We think this is really important, as well as Ebola, Sudan virus. Going on down the list, Lassa virus, Nipah virus. These are terrible viruses. There's some viruses you would recognize here. If you look in the lower right-hand corner, it also has activity against flaviviruses, including Zika, including dengue. We like our dengue molecule, so we're not going to lead with that. We're going to look at some of these other viruses, such as the Marburg virus. I mentioned multiple phase 1 safety studies have already been complete. So these are phase 1 studies in healthy volunteers. At the top here, this is a single ascending dose study and a multiple ascending dose study looking at galidesivir administered via intramuscular injection, so it's a shot. The second study here is in healthy volunteers. This is an intravenous formulation where it's administered in a single ascending dose study. The third phase 1 study is a study that was initiated. 24 subjects were enrolled, but that study was terminated. They were having trouble enrolling. They ran out of money and they didn't get to continue this study. But there have been 2+ phase 1 studies that have already been completed with galidesivir. It has an excellent safety profile, and we see no reason that we wouldn't be able to move forward with it for that. But where the rubber really meets the road, in my opinion, is when you look at the phenomenal preclinical package in different animal models that are infected with different viruses. And I'm going to give you just a snapshot of the data package that we've seen. Much of the data, in fact, probably all of the data I'm going to show you today has already been published. But I want to summarize it for you because it's frankly a little bit mind-blowing to me. I'm going to show you data from hamsters that are infected with the yellow fever virus, non-human primates infected with Zika, infected with Marburg, and infected with Ebola. So this is a lot of data. But let's start here with on the bottom of this slide on the left. This is a hamster that is infected with yellow fever experiment. This is a survival curve. So we're looking on the x-axis at time after infection. On the y-axis, we're looking at percent survival. And as you can see here, if you look in the red line, the vast majority of these animals died. These are control animals. They had no drug on board. The vast majority of them died. Only about 12% remained at the conclusion of the experiment. However, if you look at animals that were given galidesivir starting 3 and 4 days post-infection, this is not a prophylactic experiment. This is a treatment experiment. 3 and 4 days post-infection. Look, 3 days, if I can get my pointer back here, 3 days, you have 100% survival. 4 days post-infection, you have about 80% survival. This is a huge result in a yellow fever model. Next, let's turn to the middle panel here. This is looking at non-human primates that are infected with the Zika virus. And we're not looking at a survival curve. What we're looking at here is the level of virus in the blood of these animals in control-treated versus galidesivir-treated animals. What I want you to see, and then, well, let me finish this. Galidesivir or a control were administered on day 3 post-infection. Okay, so let's look at the control first. What you can see, obviously there's a peak of virus. The virus goes up to about 6 logs. It peaks at about day 3. And then if you look at the control, as it declines by between day 5, most around day 7, some out to day 10. But look what happens when you treat these animals with galidesivir. There is a rapid, dramatic decline in virus level. The virus is gone within 2 days. It's not detectable. That's, again, a huge result in a Zika infection. There's no treatment for Zika. There's nothing out there for Zika right now. We think this is a huge opportunity, not what we're going to focus on first, but I just highlight it because the data are so compelling. Let's move on to the third experiment here on the far right. This is non-human primates that are now infected with the Ebola virus. I think we've probably all heard about Ebola. It is a terrible, horrible hemorrhagic fever. Again, it's a bad virus. The fact that it's been potentially weaponized makes it a frightening virus. Again, what we're looking at here is a survival curve. So time after infection. And here, if we look at the control animals in black, again, they all succumb to the virus within about 18 days. If we look at the treated animals, these animals are now treated 1 hour post-infection, 24 hours or 48 hours post-infection. Okay. So again, it's mostly a treatment type experiment because it's the real numbers are 24 and 48 hours. What you see is the red line here is showing you animals who survived who were treated 1 hour post-infection. If they were treated 2 hours post-infection, this will go to the blue line. 100% of these animals survived. And then the 48 hours post-infection, we're down to the green line again, where about 67% of the animals survived. So again, in the face of an Ebola infection, galidesivir is protecting up to 100% of these animals. But where I really want to spend some time and thought is this experiment, which is a Marburg infection of non-human primates. And it's so compelling to me. Again, you know what we're looking at. This is a survival curve again. If you look at the control animals here in the circles, by day 12, 100% of them have succumbed to the virus. The treatment is, again, 1 hour post-infection, 24 or 48 hours post-infection. And here there's the 1 hour post-infection, we see about 80% survival, but look what we see up here in the green and the blue lines. 100% of the animals are alive when they were administered 24 and 48 hours post-infection. This is a huge result. This is in the Marburg infection, 100% lethality in this experiment, probably 50 to 90% lethality in the field. And we have a molecule that is preserving 100% of these animals when administered even 1 and 2 days post-infection. I think a phenomenal result. And you look and think, what's happening? And what's happening is the molecule, even when administered 1 and 2 days after infection, is suppressing the virus level substantially. So what we're looking at in this slide is the level of viral RNA in the blood of these animals. And again, we'll go to the control, the open circles, and we're looking at a log scale. So these are large increases in virus level. But you can see the virus level peak at about day 6 and then start to decline. All of the animals succumb to the virus at this time, so they didn't continue looking at the virus level. But when you look at the virus level from the treated animals, it is a huge 3 to 4 log reduction in virus level. Again, explaining why we see that these animals could live, because they simply don't have as much virus on board. So we're incredibly excited about this. I think the data strongly support the ability to move forward with Marburg. This is a successful Marburg study in an animal study, which ticks one of the boxes that you need for an animal rule strategy, which I'll tell you about more now. So as I've said before, typically drug development takes around 15 years, 10 to 15 years. It's a $2 billion process. That's not what we want to do. And when you're running a clinical trial looking at a virus like Marburg, you run into some problems. One of which is Marburg pops up randomly in Africa, It is really hot. Unfortunately, it wipes out the community very quickly and then it's gone. And you don't know when it's coming back. So it's not even really feasible to run a clinical trial to look at a Marburg outbreak. The second problem you may have is that if you run a clinical trial, you couldn't put anybody on a placebo control because it would be unethical. That person is likely to die. The lethality is so high. So, recognizing this problem, the FDA created what's called the animal rule. And the animal rule says if you can't ethically or safely or feasibly run a clinical trial, a human efficacy study, you may get approval based on 2 animal efficacy studies. Okay. What that means is you don't need to run a phase 2 or a phase 3 human clinical trial. And as we all know, those can become very large, very expensive studies. Instead, what you need to do for the animal rule is 2 successful animal studies and phase 1 safety data. Okay. And this is what I've outlined here in the middle. All right. 2 animal studies, phase 1 safety data. Now let's take a look at the galidesivir program. What's already been done? The dark green is showing you the things that have already been done, all of the preclinical work, in vitro work. I've just shown you data from 1 animal study. So 1 of the 2 animal studies has already been completed. I've just shown you that they've already run 2 plus phase 1 clinical trials. So phase 1 safety data is in hand. What that means is we believe, and based on the feedback we've gotten, that we may be 1 successful animal study away from submitting a new drug application. This could happen very, very quickly. We are working and in fact laying the groundwork right now to prepare to run this non-human primate study. And we'll be moving on with that as soon as we can. We are hoping to have that finished within 12 months from the time we close on this acquisition. So in the immediate near term, what we need to do over the next 30 days is transfer all of the assets from BioCryst to Island. There's some administrative documents we need to sign. We will need to pay for the asset, but we will close within 30 days. I've spoken with BioCryst today, and we're all on the same page here. We want to finalize our questions for the FDA. What we need to do is talk to the FDA, let them know of our plans to move forward with the animal rule, let them know that we now own the asset, that we're the sponsors. We can't talk to them today, but in 30 days after we've closed on the transaction, we can, and we're working right now to have documents ready to go to the FDA as soon as we can. In parallel, we're having conversations to set up to run the non-human primate study that we believe we need to do. So this is all going on right now. Again, we're working very hard to move forward as quickly as we can with an asset that we are incredibly excited about. I hope that you all are as excited as we are. The next year is going to be a phenomenal year for us as we move forward with this, as we move forward with ISLA 101. We're still very excited about that both. And as I said at the outset, we are incredibly fortunate to have 2 phenomenal molecules. We're incredibly excited about both of them. They both stand on their own and they both have huge opportunities. So I'm going to stop right there. I might say before we turn it to questions, Jason, do you have anything that you want to add to the conclusion of this? And then we'll go answer some questions.
Yeah, thanks, David. Excellent presentation. Hi again, everyone. I guess in terms of saying where to go from here or what to say after the presentation, we as pharmaceutical people, and I've been doing this for pretty much 65% of my life, we look for assets that have opportunity in the market. We look for things that are going to get us somewhere and as quickly as possible. Now, in pharmaceuticals, everyone knows it takes a very long time to get things done. It's very expensive to get things done if you start from scratch. In this case, I guess 3 years ago with Ireland, despite having, I guess, an excellent asset in terms of ISLA 101 with great potential in dengue. And what we've seen since then is they actually have shown great potential in dengue. It was still only one asset. And I remember 3 years ago talking to a lot of people who would say, well, it's one asset. Some investors felt that a company with one asset was a one-trick pony. If something goes wrong, then, you've got this inherent risk. But with one asset we already have data on, and another one that's also a high-quality asset with outstanding data. We've got these 2 assets now in high-priority diseases that have outstanding data where risk is very, very minimized within the company. And even if you take out commercial sales, because everyone talks about, again, what happens when you get an approval? How long will it take to build a curve of sales? How many people do you need? How are you going to drive it? Even taking that out of the equation completely, each one of the assets that Island currently holds has an opportunity to gain a priority review voucher. These are very coveted in the industry. Every large multinational, multi-billion-dollar pharma company is looking to try and shorten the time it takes their drug to get to market. And why would they pay $150 million for one of these things? In licensing and acquisition, they would always teach us when it comes to intellectual property, it's not the first 3 months that counts. It's the last 3 months. So if they can get their product to market 3 months earlier for $150 million and they're selling a drug that's worth 10, 15, $20 billion a year, that last 3 months can be worth $5 billion to a company before you get generic competition. And that's where the value comes in around the PRV. They're very, very coveted. They're very hard to get. And in fact, in the last 6 months or so, the rules have changed in terms of the number of PRVs that are actually available to companies, which is why you saw a jump from $100 to $150 million in the last year. So when you really think about all those things, Island has the opportunity to unlock almost $500 million. We're talking about a $30 million company right now, almost $500 million of inherent value for shareholders before the company even needs to sell a single dose of these products. This is money that's provided through a PRV that's sold to somebody else. So with the knowledge that just one animal study in the coming year will give rise to an accelerated FDA priority review and may already unlock half of that money, it's really clear to me that what people were calling a pony is actually going to win the Melbourne Cup, because it's so truly exciting to have a product like this within an organization and to have two of them, both with potential for PRVs. I've never heard of it. And I know there's no Australian company that's ever been able to put forward a product for the opportunity to get, sorry, I'm trying to think, I'm so sorry, opportunity to get the animal rule used. So in terms of companies, there's half a dozen of these opportunities because not many companies have that highest bioterrorist list. And obviously, Ebola and Marburg are two viruses that are both on that Category A list with the CDC. So having that opportunity for an Australian company of our size is actually quite immense. I'm very excited about this. Thanks, David.
Jason, thank you very much. Sam, do we have questions?
Yeah, thank you, David and Jason. We'll kick off a Q&A. Got quite a few questions coming through already. Perhaps just for starters, David or Jason, feel free to jump in here. But one attendee pointed out, just with regards to the acquisition, that was initially an agreement, right? That was just an option to buy, and now you sort of accelerated that process. So I was just wondering, is there some extra details you can provide around what happened during the due diligence phase, where you thought, okay, we can move straight to an outright acquisition?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm happy to take this first, Jason. So we, as I mentioned at the beginning, when we executed the first document with BioCryst, it was a binding term sheet for an option to acquire galidesivir. And we executed that with the full intention that we would get into diligence, we would get an option agreement put in place. That would be followed by executing the asset purchase agreement. But as we were going through the diligence, and we had a phenomenal team of experts that were looking at things from CMC to virology, preclinical work, clinical work, everything, IP, everything you can imagine. We've done significant diligence. We realized this really ticks all the boxes for us. It does everything we needed it to do. And therefore, why the option? Why not go straight to the acquisition? Why delay when we have an asset like this? Let's jump on it. Let's do the acquisition straight away and get started with it. Jason, you have more you may want to add to that one?
Just to say the value accretion of this asset purchase is actually really significant. To think about the amount of money that we've actually paid to get this asset when it's had over 100 million Australian dollars spent on it so far, and to pick up that asset for less than $1 million Australian dollars and be able to do this in such a short amount of time to unlock that PRV value, it's really quite impressive. So I'm really grateful to you and the team of experts that actually went through the dossiers for this.
Super.
Yeah, thanks, Jason and David. Perhaps next, this sort of combines a few questions from attendees that are coming through. It's points that, like, it's in connection with points that you touched on, David, during the preso. But perhaps just for clarification, can you give us an explainer on that FDA animal rule, what it is, its significance for Ireland in relation to the acquisition, potentially in connection with eligibility for the PRV as well, the priority review voucher?
Yeah, so let me start with the animal rule. The animal rule is incredibly powerful in what it enables you to do, but you have to meet certain criteria, right? They don't happen easily. As it turns out, we have with galidesivir, and because we're going after Marburg, that's really the key. There's very few viruses that you could pursue or other infectious diseases that you could pursue, and Jason has alluded to a couple already that would be eligible for animal rule strategies. So that's why we can pursue Marburg, because it's such a bad virus, because the outbreaks are so sporadic, because the outbreaks are so short in duration, you couldn't kick off a clinical trial. And so the FDA, recognizing this, came to a really good conclusion that said, if you can't feasibly run a study, if it's not ethical to run it, and I think we touched on that, you couldn't put anybody on a placebo in a Marburg study because that person's likely to die, so it's not ethical. Then you can do this animal rule where, rather than relying on human efficacy data to get the approval, you can rely on animal efficacy data, meaning you don't have to run phase 2 and phase 3 clinical trials. Again, these are expensive, large clinical trials that we simply wouldn't have to do. We can do it with 2 animal studies, animal models, and then phase 1 safety data, which, as I've already mentioned, is already in hand. So for the animal rule, again, we need to get the FDA to confirm that that's the case, but based on everything we've seen, we believe that that is going to be the case. With respect to priority review vouchers, yeah, so both of these molecules, ESO 101 and galidesivir, would be eligible for priority review vouchers. The criteria you need the boxes you need to tick to get a PRV is the molecule has to itself get priority review. Going after dengue, especially severe dengue, should qualify for priority review. Likewise, going after a countermeasure for Ebola, or for Marburg rather, would qualify for priority review in and of itself. The molecule has to first be approved in that indication. Neither of these molecules are approved. And then you have to get it approved in a disease on a list that has been established by the FDA and Congress in the United States. And as you've heard me say before, dengue's on the list, Zika's on the list, chikungunya's on the list. So are Marburg and Ebola. So both of these molecules would be eligible today for a tropical disease priority review voucher. Which again, once we get that upon approval, and then the transaction, we would expect to be roughly what it's been recently, if not more, and that's about 150 million US.
Yeah, fantastic. And I was just a question just came through from the floor then, but with respect to the application of that animal rule for Marburg in the first instance, do you think that I'll just grab this question from the floor? Does that animal rule sort of as an umbrella regulatory framework allow you to potentially then repeat the application of this treatment across different diseases, including Zika, Ebola, diseases like that?
Yeah, so the approval that we would get for the animal rule would be for the disease that we are studying in that study. So it would be for Marburg. The label for the drug would be an approval for Marburg infection. We would then get the PRV. We would sell the PRV, and then we'd need to go run clinical trials for Zika and the other indications. We would need to do that, but we would be well funded to do that.
Nice.
Jason, I may have anything you want to add to that?
Handled it beautifully, David. No problem.
Okay.
Well played. And perhaps in connection with that, so with the antiviral activity that the program's exhibited to date, is there a strategic rationale of focusing on Marburg in that first indication?
Yeah, it's very strategic. And going through the data, it gets me excited to see that there's a potential countermeasure for Zika. We have great data there. Likewise with Ebola, likewise with yellow fever. But none of those would be eligible for the animal rule. Marburg on the list of diseases where we've seen activity with galidesivir, I think Marburg probably is the only one that would be eligible for the animal rule strategy. Therefore, because it is, frankly, I think the greatest likelihood of success, I think the fastest path to approval, probably the least expensive path to approval to unlock that PRV. I think it's really the logical step for us to go is to move forward with Marburg.
Understood. And just staying on this regulatory pathway for the treatment, we just had one investor ask, can you talk to how many animal species the FDA typically requires for a pivotal animal trial like for galidesivir, for example?
Yeah. So that's a good question. You can use different species, but you need 2 experiments. So we know that there's already been one non-human primate study conducted successfully. And we've seen guidance from the FDA that tells us they would like to see another non-human primate study. So I think that's what we're going to need to do. If you had good models, it could be different species, but you need 2.
Understood. And for this animal trial, second follow-up question from the same investor. But is it possible that the trial can be conducted in Australia, do you think, to obtain R&D credits, or is there rationale for carrying it out in a different jurisdiction?
Yeah, so that is a great question. I would love to say that I think we can do this in Australia. The reality is I'm unaware of a facility in Australia where we could run a Marburg clinical trial. Marburg is such a nasty virus. I just don't think we could do that. But that doesn't mean the answer is that it's not eligible for an R&D tax incentive, because if we can't do it in Australia, we may be eligible for an advanced overseas finding to support the study done elsewhere, for instance, in the United States. So I think there's a way we may be able to get some R&D tax credit. We need to investigate that further, but I think an advanced overseas finding would support getting credit for the study done outside of Australia.
Yeah,
that's a good point, David. And certainly the R&D incentive is really to drive Australian innovation and Australian companies that can then generate products to help the world and obviously bring money back into Australia. So the idea that doing a study in the US that can't be done in Australia would you expect have a high likelihood of getting an overseas finding that would say, yes, get this thing approved and get funded. So, yeah.
Noted. Thanks, guys. Perhaps just stepping out slightly more broadly on the near-term sort of technical aspects of that development pathway. But one question was, has the company considered an approach towards any other indications yet based on initial review data, initial review of the data?
Yeah, so, great question following on from the prior discussion and I think an earlier question. The data package is great. We could select any of a number of viruses and be very excited about the prospect of moving forward with them. Zika is one that stands up really at the forefront of my mind, where I think there's a huge need and the molecule looks great for that. But the answer is no. We're really focused on Marburg right now. Marburg is, as I said earlier, the greatest likelihood of success and the fastest path to approval, and we're pretty laser focused on that right now.
Yeah, that's well noted. So turning to that slide on the development pathway you discussed with a lot of the work carried out to date on this asset, mentioned that development support so far has included significant funding from the US government, around US 70 million. Do you expect further government support with a development pathway for a treatment such as this?
So, I can't speak for the US government, but I think there was a time, especially during COVID, when a lot of resources went away from developing countermeasures for things that weren't COVID. I think the pendulum there may be swinging back, where they're beginning to fund other things. This would be consistent with something the US government, I think, might be interested in. I think in particular, the Department of Defense might be interested in this. Again, I can't speak for them. Will we be attempting to investigate this? 100%. Right. There's a huge history here. The government knows the molecule. They've supported the molecule. We're absolutely going to have those conversations.
Yeah, noted. And perhaps in line with that development today, there's a few questions from the floor around, a large counterparty selling this asset. Can you talk to the strategic rationale, perhaps for them, the sale from their side and the acquisition from your side, with ways that Ireland can potentially, add more value, and how you're well positioned to develop this treatment with the work carried out today?
So let me read. Is the question, why is BioCryst selling this asset, and what are we going to do to continue development? Is that it?
Yeah, that is sort of it's a combination of a few questions along those lines. The rationale for BioCryst to sell, and then how, Ireland's sort of well positioned to pick up this treatment with the development done today.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, thank you for clarifying. So yeah, we've get this question a lot, and we think about this a lot. The molecule has so many good features and such broad activity and such a very interesting path. But if you think about it, it was funded almost exclusively with US government money. And so at a time when the government was reducing their spend on programs like Galidesivir, especially in view of COVID coming on, BioCryst, I mean, they've said we're not going to pursue this molecule without government money. And so when they didn't have government money, it became off strategy for them, and it wasn't funded. Then they became a rare disease company. They shifted completely, and so then this became a molecule that was off strategy, without funds, and it was sitting on a shelf. So when we reached out to them, literally probably 2+ years ago, the timing was right. And we were able to obviously, put a deal together. I think that we are positioned very, very well, especially if we can move forward with this one additional non-human primate study. We have money in the bank to get that done. So we can go, we should be off to the races. Once we talk to the FDA, and I mentioned previously, we're already laying the groundwork today to run that non-human primate study. So we're planning for success here. We're planning to move forward as quickly as we can.
Yeah, just on that as well, people will often ask why a smaller size biotech can take on a market like the US. And when it comes time to commercialize, because Marburg is classified as the category of bioterrorism risk, which is really the highest threat level in the US. So people have to, the country has to be prepared for potential bioweapons that may have things that will panic or kill people. So most of the volume of Galidesivir actually as a finished product will be through the strategic medicine stockpiling from world governments. So you think about the resourcing that's required for that. It's actually quite capital light and certainly human resourcing light. And when you actually think about the usual curves as well for product take up in markets where you wait 4 to 6 years to peak your sales, and obviously when you're just starting to get the best opportunity in your product, you then fall off the edge of innovation. So in this case, from the first time you're approved, government will, if they choose to protect their population, they have to stockpile this thing, and so they buy up the stock. So year one, you get your peak your sales virtually in year one, and then there's a replenishment going on. When the product goes off expiry, they have to replenish that, put more in there. So you have this ongoing sale for government contracts that just keep going and going. So from our perspective, it's actually an ideal opportunity to move the company forward. And when you think about the amount of time we're looking here, a clinical study in animals, no more than 12 months, priority review, 6 months with the FDA. So you're looking at opportunities there that are within a 2-year time horizon. And there'd be no other company on the ASX, I can guarantee it, that has that sort of opportunity to pick up a $200 million PRV by getting something through with one animal study in 2 years of time. And that's where the real value is, I think, for shareholders. I certainly see the value in the organizational growth and how it will fund a lot of other programs as well as we move forward that will be non-dilutionary to existing shareholders. So this is a much larger opportunity than most people probably think when they just read it and think that's interesting. But when they actually read into the detail, they'll understand that this is one of the most significant products I think any biotech company in Australia could actually get hold of. And I think Ireland is very fortunate to have this opportunity.
Yeah, appreciate that, Jason. I think that's really useful context from you and David there. And perhaps just on that, looking at the way that, given the medical need that this treatment is addressing, and government interests. Is there some extra background to provide? I mean, Jason just gave a detailed explanation of how that works, but just general kind of contract sizes for acquisitions by governments in this space, given that you've got these threats and diseases that are potentially labeled bioterror by government departments, for example. Yeah, can we talk to the size of potential contracts as the clinical pathway progresses?
Yeah, so I'll start on this. A lot of times these numbers aren't readily available, but what we've been able to track down is for an anthrax vaccine. There was a contract from the US government for about $900 million. dollars. And then I think BARDA actually supported that with another $100 million. dollars. So that was a really large contract. Another company has gotten a smallpox vaccine approved, and the contract there was for about 4 consecutive years. It was between 100 and 150 million dollars US. And again, for us to think that we could, with a lean operational team, manufacture drug and sell it to the government. We don't need a sales force to do that. We don't need to scale up our headcount. We manufacture drug and sell it to our customer. So we think that's a phenomenal model for us. I don't have a lot of other data on that, but those two I thought were pretty telling.
Yeah, noted. Thanks, David. Hey, just a quick one that's come in from the floor, David. I think it was slide 14 when you were talking about the effect on animals to date. There was a application of graphs with a log scale. We just had one attendee ask if you could clarify sort of what that means to put those numbers in context about the reaction to the treatment.
Yeah. So one log is 10x. So when you see a change of 2 logs, it's a 100-fold change, or 3 logs, it's 1,000, or 10,000 for 4 logs. So it's, while it appears, changing from 6 to 3, that's 1,000 or a 10,000-fold reduction in virus level. It's an enormous change. And so I highlight that things are on a log scale when they are, because sometimes I think it's almost misleading to underrepresent the significance of the effect. But when you're looking at viruses, that's traditionally how people display it, is with a log scale.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks for jumping back into the
That's a
technical
great
side.
question. Yeah.
Oh, nice one. Yeah. So I think I'm just sort of having a look across all the questions we've received. We sort of covered off on the rationale for the acquisition and the technical aspects of the program. Perhaps looking ahead now, we sort of referenced it at the end of the presentation, but can we just go back over sort of what are the company's immediate next steps now in regards to Galidesivir to give attendees a sort of useful snapshot summary?
Yeah. So again, we're going to be working in the next 30 days to get all of the final documents signed, to get the ownership of the assets transferred to Island Pharmaceuticals from BioCryst. So that'll be a part of it, and we'll keep you across that. Whenever we have a closing, you'll know when we've closed and we actually own the asset. What we're going to be working on in addition to that is putting together a dossier and questions to submit to the FDA just as soon as we can. As soon as we own those assets and we can be the sponsor, we're going to submit documents to the FDA to apprise them of the fact that we're now the sponsor, let them know that we plan on pursuing the animal rule, and solicit their feedback and hopefully blessing to pursue the animal rule. Again, we've got lots of support suggesting that will be the case, but until we hear it from the FDA, we need to go talk to them. So golly, yeah. Also, in parallel, we're working on actually setting up for the non-human primate study. So we're having conversations right now with sites who could potentially be doing that study. We don't want to wait. We don't want to wait around. We think it's too important and time is too valuable that we need to get going on some of this. So that's what's going to happen with Galidesivir. Just in the next 30 to 60 days, we'll be closing the transaction, getting documents submitted to the FDA, making plans for the next study that, again, we hope is wrapped up within 12 months of the closing of the acquisition.
Yeah, thanks, David. I think that's a really useful series of milestones there for investors to look out for over the next couple of months now. So perhaps to finish off the Q&A section, and this can be a question for David and Jason, but at a more sort of overview, strategic level, now that the company has this dual asset portfolio, can you just talk to the strategy for advancing galidesivir alongside ISLA as part of that multi-asset development pathway?
Yeah, great question, and obviously something that the board has had a lot of discussion around. We are in such a fortunate situation to have two phenomenal assets, both of which are supported by phenomenal preclinical data. With ISLA 101, we have outstanding data from a phase 2 clinical trial in dengue-infected individuals. We're incredibly excited about that. Galidesivir has an exciting path forward on the regulatory side of things that could get to an approval very, very quickly. So, as I've said, we're going to go straight to the FDA whenever we can, get the FDA's opinion about our ability to move forward with the animal rule. And then we want to get going on galidesivir as soon as we can. In parallel, we're continuing to talk to our experts as we review the data out of the PROTECT clinical trial from ISLA 101, because we want to set that next clinical trial up for success. We want to do that in a very smart way, and we're working on those plans right now. So we plan to move forward with both of these molecules, but galidesivir is going to lead the way at this point because it is such a short, fat path to approval. Jason, you may have more to add to that.
Well, obviously the board is completely aligned on this strategy, so no, that's tremendous.
Yeah.
And no question. I mean, you've got to look at both assets in the right way, and you've got to see what's the near-term opportunity of those assets. And if we know there is a $200 million opportunity in one single customer, potentially after an animal study that we know exactly how long that timeline is going to be, once those monkeys or whatever group we choose have that dose, within 28 days, you'll have your result. There's no need to interpret first line, second line opportunities, endpoints, and bring all that together over a period of a study can take a couple of years. So in terms of getting the study done, there's defined endpoints. There's a way in which you can show exactly what's going to happen. And it's in human and non-human primates. So from a point of view of getting that done, it's not that expensive. It's very, very fast. And the opportunity at the end is a pretty large pot at the end of that rainbow that we should be able to bring in to support shareholders and support the company. And with that, you never really have to raise money again because you have such a large pot of money that you can work with to generate a lot of clinical work and obviously a lot more indications, which we've seen how many indications galidesivir can actually go into. We also know there's more indications that ISLA 101 can go into, and we've got a lot of work that we can do. And that gives us a lot of opportunity when we have funding that is not necessarily held on trying to raise over a period of time, when you can get a large pot at the within a couple of years. And I think that's where we have to look at how we manage our organization as we race to that PRV, because we're the only ones out there trying to go after this. And Ebola and Marburg have been difficult to treat. They've been talked about in the industry for 30 years. J&J spent 5 years of their own time trying to find a pathway to a treatment for Ebola, but they failed. And so has everyone else. And they don't have an asset like this that's actually showing great data. And they certainly can't follow a path, the animal rule path. So when you're given an opportunity like that, it would be inappropriate for us to ignore that. And we have to go where the opportunity is. So both will get developed, both assets will get developed, but certainly we'll do everything we can to push galidesivir through as quickly as possible through the FDA.
Yep.
Yeah, that's well noted, Jason, and I think good insight for investors about the strategic oversight at board level. So thanks for your response there too, David. We're just coming out to the hour mark, so I think we'll wrap up the Q&A there. We've had a lot of questions come through from the floor like usual. Always plenty of interest with Ireland. So we've tried to sort of group questions where we can to ask you guys questions that reflect what different investors and attendees want to know. But our apologies there to anyone if we missed some questions, because there was a lot of interest that came through. So I think we'll wrap up the webinar there. Obviously, thanks to David and Jason for that presentation and taking the time to answer questions. Just flagging as usual that obviously a recording of the webinar will be made available across all Ireland's platforms. So it'll be very accessible if attendees want to listen back over to the presentation. David or Jason, just before we go, any final comments to add?
Yeah, I do. One, I want to thank everybody. I see we had really good participation. I want to thank everybody for showing up. The next year is going to be remarkably exciting for us. We are in a phenomenal situation with two exciting assets. We've got a board that's committed and working together to get this done. We're excited about where we're going. And so I really would encourage you to come along the journey with us. It's going to be a lot of fun and we're going to do a lot of good. So again, thanks for everybody. Jason, I'll turn it over to you for any final words.
Thanks everyone for joining. Really appreciate it, and the support of Ireland over the number of years. For those that have been there for a couple of years, for those that are new, have seen the stuff that was being presented today. I think that you would agree that the presentation is extremely thorough. There's some amazing data for us to work with here. And we have some two amazing assets we can now progress. And it's not very often you see an organization with a short-term and a medium-term asset that you can develop into two significantly large billion-dollar opportunities. And I think we have two of them. And I truly am excited and grateful to be asked to be on the board, assuming that you guys vote me in November to say I can stay. I'd really appreciate that. But in terms of opportunity here, I think it's just outstanding. So thanks everyone for dialing in.
Great.
Thanks, Jason. Thanks, David. We'll wrap it up there. And thanks again, presenters, attendees. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank you.